The champagne tasted like victory, crisp, expensive, and intoxicating. Arthur stood on the balcony of the penthouse, his hand resting on the small of his mistress's back, watching the city lights flicker below. He had done it. He had moved the assets, signed the papers, and secured his freedom without his wife suspecting a thing. He was the smartest man in the room, or so he thought. But 40 minutes later, Arthur would unlock the front door of his marital estate to find a silence so heavy it felt like a physical blow. He didn't just lose his wife, he walked into a house where even the copper wiring had been stripped from the walls. This isn't just a breakup story, it's a masterclass in revenge. Arthur Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, catching his reflection in the glass of his corner office on the 42nd floor. Below him, the financial district of Boston looked like a circuit board, a maze of power and money that he had learned to navigate with surgical precision. At 46, Arthur was the kind of man who believed he created his own gravity. He was a senior partner at Sterling and Associates, a real estate development firm that had reshaped the skyline. But his most intricate project over the last 6 months hadn't been a skyscraper. It had been his divorce. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over a contact, saved simply as J. "It's done," he texted. The reply came 3 seconds later. "Tonight? Tonight. I'm leaving the office now. Meet me at the Capitol Grill, the usual booth." Arthur smiled, a cold, thin expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had spent the last year meticulously siphoning funds from his joint accounts with his wife, Margaret. He hadn't been reckless. Arthur didn't do reckless. He had been patient. He created shell companies under the names of distant relatives who didn't exist. He funneled bonuses into offshore accounts in the Caymans. He had even convinced Margaret to sign over power of attorney for their primary assets, the summer home in the Hamptons, the vintage Porsche collection, and the stock portfolio under the guise of estate planning and tax optimization. Margaret. Poor, plain, predictable Margaret. She had been the perfect corporate wife for 20 years. She hosted the dinners, remembered the investors' birthdays, and raised their son, Leo, who was now away at Yale. But Margaret had grown stale. She wore cardigan sets and worried about her gardenias. She didn't have the fire, the edge, or the youth of Jessica Vane. Jessica was 28, an interior designer with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes and an ambition that matched Arthur's own. She made Arthur feel like a king, not a husband. Arthur grabbed his briefcase. Inside was the final piece of the puzzle, the divorce papers. He intended to serve Margaret tonight. He had timed it perfectly. The prenup had a clause about infidelity, but Arthur had been careful. No paper trail, no photos, just burner phones and cash dinners. He was going to blindside Margaret, offer her a pittance of a settlement, which on paper would look like half of his diminished net worth, and walk away with millions to start his new life with Jessica. He walked out of his office, nodding to his secretary, Mrs. Gable. "Good night, Mr. Sterling. Give my best to Margaret," she said warmly. "I will, Mrs. Gable," Arthur lied smoothly. "I certainly will." He took the private elevator down to the garage. As he slid into his Mercedes S-Class, the adrenaline hit him. It wasn't fear. It was the thrill of the heist. He had looked Margaret in the eye this very morning, kissed her cheek, and complained about a headache. She had offered him tea. She was so devastatingly naive. He pulled out of the garage, merging into the traffic on Congress Street. He thought about the timeline, dinner with Jessica, to celebrate. Then, the drive home to Brookline. He would walk in, pour himself a scotch, and hand Margaret the envelope. He expected tears, maybe some shouting, but she would sign. She always did what he told her was best for the family. What Arthur didn't account for was the variable he never bothered to calculate: Margaret's silence. For the last 3 months, Margaret had been quieter than usual. Arthur had attributed it to empty nest syndrome, or perhaps early menopause. He never once considered that while he was playing checkers, Margaret, the woman who spent her Sundays organizing the church bake sale, might be playing three-dimensional chess. He arrived at the steakhouse, the valet rushing to open his door. Inside, the air smelled of aged beef and old money. Jessica was already there, sitting in the high-backed leather booth in the back corner, wearing a dress that cost more than Mrs. Gable's car. When she saw him, her face lit up. It was the look of a woman who knew she had won the lottery. "Did you bring it?" Jessica whispered, before Arthur had even fully sat down. Her hand snaked across the white tablecloth, gripping his forearm. Her nails were painted a deep, blood red. Arthur chuckled, placing the heavy briefcase on the leather seat beside him. "Patience, Jess. We have all night. We have the rest of our lives. I just want to know it's over," she said, pouting slightly in a way Arthur found intoxicating. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of you going home to her." "I'm not going home to her," Arthur corrected, signaling the sommelier. "I'm going home to end it. Tonight is the transition. Tomorrow, you and I are looking at listings in Back Bay. The penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental is available." Jessica squealed softly, masking it with a sip of water. "Arthur, you're bad." "I'm efficient," he said. The sommelier arrived. Arthur ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon, 2008. He didn't even look at the price. Why would he? He had just successfully hidden $4 million in a complex trust in Nevis. He felt invincible. As they ate, Arthur recounted the plan again, feeding his own ego. He told Jessica how he had convinced Margaret to sign the refinancing documents on the Brookline house last month. "I told her the market was volatile, and we needed to pull equity to secure the business," Arthur boasted, slicing into his filet mignon. "She didn't even read the fine print. That cash is now sitting in an LLC that you are the silent partner of, Jessica." "She really didn't read it?" Jessica asked, eyes wide. "God, that's just sad." "Margaret trusts me," Arthur said, taking a long drink of champagne. "She's a good woman, in the traditional sense, but she's not built for this world. She thinks the best of people. That's her fatal flaw." "And your fatal flaw?" Jessica teased, running her foot up his calf under the table. "I don't have one," Arthur said, and he believed it. They skipped dessert. The anticipation was too high. Arthur paid the bill with his corporate card, leaving a massive tip. He felt generous. He felt like a god. He walked Jessica to her Uber outside. The air was crisp, typical for Boston in late October. "Call me when it's done," Jessica said, pulling him in for a kiss. It was deep, passionate, and public. For the first time, Arthur didn't look over his shoulder. He wanted the world to see. He wanted Margaret to find out. Eventually, it would make the cut cleaner. "I'll be at your place by midnight," Arthur promised. With the signed papers, he watched her car drive away, then turned to the valet. "My car. Hurry." The drive to Brookline took 30 minutes. Arthur spent the time rehearsing his speech. "Margaret, we've grown apart. I've found someone who understands my ambition. I've made sure you'll be comfortable. But I need this divorce." Simple, direct. No room for negotiation. He turned onto the street of his estate. It was a cul-de-sac of mansions, lined with ancient oak trees. His house, a 1920s Georgian brick manor, usually stood imposing and warm at the end of the drive. The landscape lighting usually illuminated the manicured hedges and the stone facade. But as he approached, Arthur frowned. The house was dark. Not just everyone is asleep dark. It was the kind of darkness that felt void. The landscape lights were off. The porch light was off. Even the security LEDs that usually glowed red near the gate were dead. "Power outage?" he muttered to himself. He checked the neighbor's house. The Johnson residence next door was blazing with light. Arthur pulled into the driveway. He pressed the button for the garage door opener. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Frustrated, he slammed the remote against the dashboard. "Damn it, Margaret. Did you forget to pay the electric bill?" He parked the car in the driveway and got out. The silence of the neighborhood felt oppressive. He walked to the front door, fumbling for his keys. He unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open. "Margaret," he called out, his voice echoing strangely. "The power is out. Where are the flashlights?" He reached for the switch in the foyer, out of habit. He flipped it. Nothing. He pulled out his iPhone and turned on the flashlight. He swept the beam across the grand foyer. Arthur Sterling froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a hollow thud. The foyer was empty. The antique grandfather clock that had belonged to his grandfather? Gone. The Persian rug that had cost $40,000? Gone. The console table where they kept the mail? Gone. But it wasn't just the furniture. Arthur took a shaky step forward, swinging the light toward the walls. The sconces were gone. Wires dangled from the holes in the plaster like severed nerves. He looked down. The floorboards. They looked different. He knelt, touching the wood. The expensive, hand-scraped walnut flooring had been pried up. Beneath was the rough subflooring. What the hell? He ran into the living room. Empty. The dining room. Empty. Even the chandelier was missing, leaving a gaping hole in the ceiling. The kitchen. He gasped. The appliances, the Wolf range, the Sub-Zero fridge, were gone. The cabinet doors had been unscrewed from their hinges. The granite countertops had been pried off. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers took TVs and jewelry. They didn't take the countertops. They didn't take the flooring. He ran up the stairs, his footsteps booming on the bare wood. "Margaret!" he screamed. "Margaret!" He burst into the master bedroom. Empty. No bed, no dressers, no curtains. He ran to the walk-in closet. His suits, his shoes, his watch collection, all gone. On the floor, in the center of the empty master bedroom, sat a single object. It was a small, folding card table. On top of it sat a cheap plastic chair, and on the table was a single, white envelope with his name on it. Arthur's breath came in ragged gasps. He walked over to the table, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the flashlight. He picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. He pulled out the letter. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a legal document. At the top, the letterhead read, "Lawson, Clark, and O'Malley, attorneys at law." He read the first line, "Dear Mr. Sterling, please find, enclose the eviction notice for the property located at 142 Willow Creek Lane. Furthermore, be advised that the assets previously held by Sterling and Associates have been frozen, pending a federal investigation into embezzlement and fraud initiated by the whistleblower testimony of your former accountant, Mrs. Margaret Sterling." Arthur dropped the paper. The silence of the house suddenly felt like it was screaming at him. He wasn't the one serving papers tonight. Arthur stared at the letter until the words blurred into meaningless black ink. The flashlight beam in his hand wavered, casting jittery shadows against the bare studs of the wall where a $15,000 oil painting of the Boston Harbor used to hang. Whistleblower. The word tasted like bile. Margaret wasn't a whistleblower. She was a gardener. She was a member of the Junior League. She was the woman who cried during Kodak commercials. She couldn't possibly understand the complex web of offshore shell companies, the phantom vendor invoices, or the intricate tax evasion schemes he had built over the last decade. It took a team of forensic accountants to understand that, or a criminal mastermind. Arthur dropped the letter on the card table and ran his hands through his hair, gripping the roots tight. He needed to think. He needed to stabilize the ship. Okay, Arthur. Breathe," he whispered to the empty room. "She's bluffing. She wants a settlement. This is a shock-and-awe tactic. She stripped the house to rattle me." He pulled out his phone again. He ignored Jessica's texts, 3 of them now, asking where he was, and dialed his private banker in the Cayman Islands. It was late, but Henri was paid to be available. The line rang, and rang. Then, a click. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again." Arthur frowned. That was a secure line. He dialed Henri's personal cell. "The number you have dialed." A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. He opened his banking app on his phone. He logged in with his thumbprint. "Access denied. Please contact your branch." He tried his secondary account at Chase. Account frozen. He tried his Amex app. Card canceled. Panic, real and visceral, began to claw at his throat. He looked around the room. He needed to find something, anything, that Margaret had left behind. A clue, a mistake. He grabbed the flashlight and began to prowl the empty house like a trapped animal. He went to the kitchen. The refrigerator was gone, but the water hookup was still there, a small copper pipe sticking out of the wall, dripping a single drop of water every 10 seconds. Drip, drip. He opened the pantry door. Empty shelves. Even the shelf liners had been peeled off. But there, in the corner of the pantry floor, sat a small, red notebook. Arthur lunged for it. He recognized it immediately. It was Margaret's housebook. She used it to track grocery lists, the pool cleaner's schedule, and dinner party menus. He had mocked it for years, calling it her trivial little diary. He opened it. The first few pages were standard: milk, eggs, dry cleaning. But as he flipped to the entries from 6 months ago, right around the time he had started sleeping with Jessica, the handwriting changed. It became sharper, more pressed. March 12th. Arthur came home late again. Smelled of Chanel Chance. He lied about a board meeting. I checked the minutes online. The board didn't meet. March 15th. Checked the safe while he was in the shower. Found the second phone. Took photos of the texts. J. April 2nd. Met with David regarding the forensic audit. It's worse than I thought. He's not just cheating on me. He's cheating the firm. He's moving client escrow funds into the Nevis Trust. Arthur froze. She knew about the escrow funds? That was federal prison time. That wasn't just a divorce. That was a RICO case. He flipped the pages faster, his heart hammering against his ribs. May 10th. Arthur asked me to sign the refinancing papers. He thinks I'm stupid. I signed them, but I had David swap the Schedule A at the last second. He didn't read it. He signed over the equity to the Sterling Family Trust. I am the sole trustee, June 1st. Contacted the liquidation company. They can strip the house in 48 hours. They pay cash for copper, flooring, and fixtures. Book them for October 24th. October 24th, today. Arthur looked at the final entry. It was dated this morning. October 24th, 8 a.m. He kissed me goodbye. He looked right through me. He thinks he's the hunter. He doesn't realize he's the carcass. Goodbye, Arthur. I left you the card table so you'd have somewhere to sign your plea deal. Arthur threw the book across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thwack. He wasn't just broke. He was exposed. Every dirty deal, every laundered dollar she had, tracked it all. And she had been smiling at him across the dinner table the whole time. He paced the kitchen. He had to leave. He couldn't stay in this hollowed-out skeleton of a house. It felt like the walls were closing in, mocking him with their bare plaster. He marched to the front door, grabbing the eviction notice. He would go to the office. He had cash in the safe there. He had passports. He could get to the airport, fly to a non-extradition country before the feds put it all together. He just needed a head start. He ran to his car. He pushed the start button. The engine roared to life. Thank God. At least she hadn't taken the car. He threw it into reverse and backed out of the driveway, tires screeching. He didn't look back at the dark, empty house. He sped toward the city, the lights of Boston blurring into streaks of neon. He dialed Jessica. He needed a place to lay low for a few hours before the flight. Jessica, pick up, he hissed. Voicemail. Jessica, listen to me. Plans have changed. Do not go to the penthouse. Meet me at the office. Now. It's an emergency. He hung up. He checked his watch. 11:45 p.m. He was Arthur Sterling. He had talked his way out of an SEC audit in 2018. He had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with hostile unions. He could fix this. He just needed to get to his office. But as he merged onto the highway, he didn't notice the black sedan that pulled out from a side street 2 blocks away, following him at a discreet distance. The lobby of the Sterling & Associates building was quiet, bathed in the cool glow of security lights. Arthur parked his Mercedes in the underground executive lot. He noted with relief that his spot was empty. No police cruisers, no FBI vans. Maybe he had beaten them to the punch. He took the elevator up. He tapped his keycard against the sensor. Beep. Green light. Yes, he breathed. Margaret hadn't gotten to security yet. The elevator rose smoothly to the 42nd floor. Arthur planned his moves. Open the floor safe. Grab the $50,000 in emergency cash. Grab the second passport he kept under the false bottom of his humidor. Shred the hard drives. Leave. The doors slid open. Arthur stepped out and stopped dead. The lights on the floor were fully on. Sitting at the reception desk, usually occupied by the young and bubbly receptionist, was a man Arthur had never seen before. He was thick-necked, wearing a cheap suit and a headset, and standing in the middle of the bullpen, surrounded by boxes, was Mrs. Gable, his secretary, the woman who had worked for him for 15 years, the woman who sent flowers to his mother and organized his dry cleaning. She was holding a file box. She looked up as Arthur stepped off the elevator. Her expression wasn't one of surprise. It was one of pity. "Mrs. Gable?" Arthur stammered. "What are you doing here at midnight? Who is this?" He gestured to the man at the desk. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Gable said, her voice steady. "I'm just packing up my personal effects." "Pack up later," Arthur snapped, his old authority trying to assert itself. "I need you to get the shredder, the industrial one, and book me a flight to—" "I can't do that, Arthur," she interrupted. She used his first name. She had never used his first name. Arthur stiffened. "Excuse me? I don't work for you anymore," she said calmly. "I resigned effective 5 p.m. today. Actually, I've been working as a cooperating witness for the district attorney for the past 3 months." The room spun. Arthur grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "You what?" "Margaret came to me." "Arthur," Mrs. Gable said, walking closer. She didn't look intimidated. She looked liberated. "She showed me the emails. The ones where you called me an overpaid old cow to Jessica. The ones where you planned to fire me right after the divorce, to cut costs." Arthur's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He remembered those texts. He had sent them while drunk on sake in a hotel room in Tokyo. "I have a pension to think of, Arthur," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice hardening. "And I have a grandson with special needs. When Margaret told me you were looting the company pension fund to pay for your mistress's condo, well, let's just say it wasn't hard to choose a side. I never touched the pension fund," Arthur lied, though his voice cracked. "Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "We have the logs. I gave them everything. The duplicate ledgers you kept in the safe? I gave them the combination." Arthur's eyes darted to his office door. It was slightly ajar. "You can't go in there," the man at the desk said, standing up. He was big. "The office is a sealed crime scene." "This is my building," Arthur roared, losing control. "I built this." Actually, a new voice boomed from the conference room. Arthur whipped around. Walking out of the conference room was David Thorne, the company's external legal counsel, the man Arthur paid to protect him. "David," Arthur exhaled. "Thank God. Tell these people to get out. Mrs. Gable is having a breakdown." David adjusted his glasses. He didn't look at Arthur with the usual deference. He looked at him like he was a stain on the carpet. "Arthur, I'm here representing the board of directors. They held an emergency vote via Zoom an hour ago." "A vote? Without me?" "You were unreachable," David said smoothly. "Given the credible evidence of massive embezzlement presented by Mrs. Sterling and verified by Mrs. Gable, the board voted unanimously to terminate you for cause, effective immediately." "Terminate me?" Arthur laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I own 40% of the shares. The bylaws are clear on criminal conduct," David said. "And regarding your shares, the DOJ has issued a freezing order on all your assets as of 9 p.m. tonight. You can't sell, you can't trade, and you certainly can't access the safe in your office." Arthur looked at the office door, his passport, his cash. "David, listen to me," Arthur pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have leverage. I know about the senator's land deal. I can bring this whole firm down." David stepped closer, his face inches from Arthur's. "Arthur, Margaret gave us the files on the senator, too. We've already self-reported to the SEC in exchange for leniency. The firm will survive. You won't." Arthur looked at Mrs. Gable. She had resumed packing her box. She placed a framed photo of her grandson on top. "You should go, Arthur," she said, without looking up. "The FBI agents went to the house in Brookline. When they realized you weren't there, they headed here. They're in the lobby. Arthur backed away toward the elevator. This isn't over, he snarled, though he knew it sounded weak. I'll sue you all. I'll burn this place to the ground. You already did, Mrs. Gable said softly. Now you're just standing in the ashes. Arthur hit the elevator button repeatedly. The doors opened. He scrambled inside. As the doors closed, he saw Mrs. Gable turn off the lights in the bullpen, plunging the floor into darkness, leaving only the exit sign glowing red. He reached the garage. He didn't see the FBI yet. He jumped into his car. He had one card left to play, Jessica. She had money. She had the jewelry he bought her easily $500,000 worth. They could fence it. They could drive to Canada. It wasn't the glamorous exit he planned, but it was survival. He peeled out of the garage, swiping the side of the Mercedes against a concrete pillar, shattering the side mirror. He didn't stop. He drove toward the Seaport district, toward Jessica. Jessica lived in a high-rise in the Seaport, a glass needle jutting out of the harbor. Arthur had paid the lease for the last 2 years. He had furnished it. He paid for the clothes in the closet and the food in the fridge. It was his sanctuary. He abandoned the Mercedes a block away, afraid that the GPS tracker might be active. He pulled his collar up and walked briskly against the wind. It had started to rain, a cold, stinging New England rain. He buzzed the intercom. Jessica? It's me. Let me in. Silence. Jessica, I know you're there. The doorman sees you. A crackle of static. Arthur? Yes, it's me. Open the damn door. You shouldn't be here, she said. Her voice sounded different, not the baby doll whisper she used in bed. It was flat, annoyed. Jessica, open the door, or I'm breaking the glass, he threatened. The buzzer sounded. He pushed the door open and sprinted to the elevator. When he reached her floor, the door to apartment 12B was already open. Jessica was standing in the doorway. She wasn't wearing the lingerie he expected. She was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, and she was holding a cigarette. Arthur hated smoking. She never smoked around him. You look like hell, she said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. Arthur pushed past her into the apartment. It was warm. It smelled of vanilla and safety. Pack a bag, he ordered, moving to the bedroom. We have to leave. Now. Get the jewelry. The diamond tennis bracelet. The Cartier watch. All of it. He stopped. The bedroom looked different. There were boxes on the bed, men's boxes, and sitting on the edge of the bed, folding a shirt, was a man. He was younger than Arthur, maybe 30, fit, handsome, in a rugged, unintelligent way. Who the hell is this? Arthur demanded, pointing a shaking finger. Jessica leaned against the doorframe, taking another drag. That's Chad. He's my personal trainer. Why is your personal trainer packing my shirts? Arthur screamed. They aren't your shirts, old man, Chad said, standing up. He was 3 inches taller than Arthur. And this isn't your apartment. Arthur turned to Jessica. What is he talking about? I pay the rent here. Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, dry sound. You paid the rent here, but I got an email from the leasing office about 2 hours ago. The direct deposit from Sterling Holdings was reversed. Insufficient funds, and the credit card on file was declined. So, it's a glitch. I'll fix it tomorrow. There is no tomorrow, Arthur, Jessica said. She walked over to the dresser and picked up her phone. She turned the screen toward him. It was a news alert from the Boston Globe. Breaking. Real estate mogul Arthur Sterling sought for questioning in $50 million fraud scheme. Wife cooperating with feds. Arthur stared at his face on the screen. It was his official headshot. He looked confident, powerful, a stranger. You're radioactive, Jessica said, putting the phone down. And I don't do radioactive. I did this for us, Arthur whispered, the fight draining out of him. I left her for you. I embezzled that money to buy us the penthouse. Jessica rolled her eyes. Arthur, please. You didn't do it for me. You did it because you're a narcissist who got bored. If it wasn't me, it would have been the next girl. She walked over to the counter and picked up a velvet pouch. And as for the jewelry, she poured the contents into her hand. The diamonds sparkled under the recessed lighting. Consider this, my severance package. Pawn shops, open at 9. That's mine, Arthur said, stepping forward. Chad stepped in between them. He shoved Arthur in the chest. It wasn't a hard shove, but Arthur was weak, exhausted, and broken. He stumbled back and fell onto the rug. Get out, Chad said. Arthur looked up at Jessica from the floor. He waited for her to defend him. He waited for the woman who whispered, "I love you" 3 hours ago to step in. Jessica looked down at him. She looked at his disheveled hair, his wet suit, the desperation in his eyes. She curled her lip in disgust. "You know, Margaret called me," Jessica said casually. Arthur blinked. "She called you?" "Yeah, about a month ago." She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just told me, "If you want him, you can have him, but make sure you get paid up front, because when I'm done with him, he won't have 2 nickels to rub together." Jessica smirked. She was right. She's a smart lady, your wife. Smarter than you. "Get out!" Chad barked again. Arthur scrambled to his feet. He looked at Jessica one last time. "I loved you. You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes," Jessica corrected. "Now get out before I call the cops. I'm sure they'd love to know exactly where you are." Arthur stumbled out of the apartment. The door slammed shut behind him. He heard the lock click, then the deadbolt, then the chain. He was in the hallway. He walked to the elevator. He rode it down to the lobby. He walked out into the rain. He went to where he had left his car. It was gone. In its place, a tow truck was just pulling away, the Mercedes hooked up to the back. "Hey!" Arthur ran after it. "That's my car." The driver didn't stop. Arthur stood in the middle of the street, the rain soaking through his bespoke Brioni suit, ruining the silk lining. He patted his pockets. His wallet was in the car. His phone, he pulled out his phone. 4% battery. He had no car, no money, no home, no mistress, no job, and the FBI was looking for him. He looked around the seaport, the high-end restaurants, the luxury condos. He had helped develop this neighborhood. He was a king here. Now, he was a ghost. His phone buzzed. 3% battery. A text message. From Margaret. He stared at the screen, his thumb trembling. He opened it. "Checkmate. P.S. I canceled your country club membership, too. They don't allow felons." Arthur let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He looked down the long, dark street. He had nowhere to go, except back. Back to the one place he legally still had a right to be, until the eviction notice was processed. The empty house. The walk from the Seaport District to Brookline was a journey of 5 miles. But for Arthur Sterling, it felt like a descent through the circles of hell. The rain didn't let up. It hammered against the asphalt, turning the gutters into rushing gray rivers. Arthur walked. He didn't have money for the tea, and his Uber account was suspended. The Brioni suit, once a symbol of his armor against the world, was now a heavy, sodden cage. The wool chafed his neck. The silk lining stuck to his skin like a cold sweat. He walked past the high-end boutiques of Newbury Street, where he had bought Margaret an anniversary bracelet 3 years ago. A bracelet he later found she had exchanged for store credit to buy a set of high-performance luggage. She was planning this then, he realized with a jolt. 3 years ago, he trudged past the brownstones of Back Bay, keeping his head down. He was terrified someone would recognize him. Arthur Sterling, the titan of real estate, the man who was on the cover of Boston Business Journal last month. Now he looked like a vagrant. A passing taxi splashed a wave of oily puddle water onto his legs. Arthur didn't even flinch. He just kept walking. By the time he reached the winding, tree-lined streets of his neighborhood in Brookline, the sky was beginning to turn the bruised purple of pre-dawn. The adrenaline that had fueled his panic was gone, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He turned onto Willow Creek Lane. The houses here were silent fortresses of wealth. The Johnson Estate, the Pembroke Manor, and at the end of the cul-de-sac, the Sterling House. It looked like a skull in the dim light. With no curtains, the windows were black, hollow sockets staring out at the street. The front door was still ajar from where he had left it hours ago. Arthur stumbled up the driveway. His legs gave out as he reached the porch steps, and he crawled the last few feet. He pushed the door open and collapsed into the foyer. It was colder inside than it was outside. The house had no heating. Margaret had cut the utilities. Of course she had. Margaret? He croaked, his voice a broken rasp. Silence. He dragged himself upright, leaning against the bare plaster wall. He needed to rest. Just for an hour. Then he would figure this out. He would call someone. There had to be someone he hadn't screwed over. He wandered into the living room. The card table was still there. The plastic chair. He sat down on the chair, shivering violently. His teeth chattered so hard, he bit his tongue, the copper taste of blood filling his mouth. He looked around the empty room. The memories began to ghost over the bare walls. Here was the Christmas tree, where Leo opened his acceptance letter to Yale. Here was the spot where Margaret and he had danced to Sinatra on their 10th anniversary. Here was the fireplace where he had burned the first threatening letter from a contractor he refused to pay. It was all gone. Arthur closed his eyes. He drifted into a feverish doze. He was awoken by a sound. Click, clack, click, clack. Heels on wood. Arthur jerked his head up. The morning light was streaming through the curtainless windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Standing in the doorway of the living room was Margaret. She didn't look like the woman he had left yesterday morning. She wasn't wearing the beige cardigans or the sensible loafers. She was wearing a structured navy trench coat, tailored perfectly to her frame. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was blown out, sleek and shining. She wore oversized sunglasses, which she slowly removed as she looked at him. She looked expensive. She looked powerful. "You look terrible, Arthur," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was clinical, like a doctor observing a terminal patient. Arthur tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He slumped back into the plastic chair. "Margaret," he whispered, "you ruined me." "No, Arthur," she said, stepping into the room. She was holding a thermos. "I just balanced the books. There's a difference." "Why?" he pleaded. "Why not just divorce me? Why this? Why the feds? Why the house?" Margaret walked over to the fireplace, the empty, cold fireplace. She turned to face him. "Because a divorce implies a split, Arthur, a division of assets. 50-50, but you didn't give me 50% of your life. You took 100% of mine." She unscrewed the thermos and poured steam-curling coffee into the lid. The smell of roasted beans hit Arthur like a physical blow. He was so thirsty. "I spent 20 years building you up," Margaret said softly. "I smoothed over your insults at dinner parties. I raised our son while you were working late. I signed every paper you put in front of me because I trusted you." She took a sip of the coffee. She didn't offer him any. "And then I found the second phone," she said, "and I realized I wasn't your partner. I was your employee, and a poorly paid one at that." "I can fix this," Arthur begged. "Margaret, listen. I have money hidden that they didn't find. Crypto. It's on a hard drive in the storage unit in Chelsea. We can take it. We can go to Belize." Margaret smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "The storage unit in Chelsea? Unit 404? Arthur stopped breathing. "Leo and I went there last week," she said. "He's very good with computers, our son. He cracked your encryption in under an hour. We transferred the crypto into a generic wallet and donated it to the Massachusetts Alliance for Ethical Business Practices. Anonymous donor, of course." "You stole my money?" "I liquidated our assets," she corrected. "And regarding Leo, you should know, he's not at Yale right now. He took a semester off to help me with this project. He calls it his capstone project in corporate justice." Arthur felt a tear leak from his eye. His own son. "You turned my son against me. You were never there to be turned for," Margaret snapped, her voice finally showing a crack of emotion. "You missed his graduation. You missed his surgery. You missed his life, Arthur. You didn't have a son. You had an heir. And heirs, waiting for their inheritance, get impatient." She checked her watch. A Cartier tank. He hadn't bought that for her. "You have about 10 minutes, she said. 10 minutes? For what?" "The police," she said calmly. "I triggered the silent alarm when I walked in. Since the house is technically owned by the Sterling Family Trust, of which I am the sole trustee, and you have been formally evicted, You are currently trespassing. You're sending me to jail for trespassing? Arthur laughed hysterically. I'm going away for fraud, for embezzlement. Oh, the fraud charges will keep you in prison for 20 years, Margaret agreed. But I wanted to make sure you were arrested here. In this empty house, I wanted the last image the world sees of Arthur Sterling to be a man sitting on a plastic chair in the ruins of the life he threw away. Sirens wailed in the distance. They were getting closer. Arthur looked at his wife, really looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine that he had mistaken for stiffness. He saw the intelligence in her eyes that he had mistaken for simplicity. I underestimated you, he whispered. Everyone does, Margaret said, buttoning her coat. That's my superpower. She turned to leave. Margaret, he called out. She stopped at the doorway, but didn't look back. What happens to you? He asked. You burned the company. You have nothing. Margaret turned her head slightly. Arthur, I have the shell companies you set up in Nevis. You thought you were hiding money from me? I was the one who recommended that accountant to you. He's my cousin. Arthur's jaw dropped. I have $5 million, Arthur. I have a condo in Paris. And I have a date for lunch. With who? With the FBI agent in charge of your case. He's quite charming, and very grateful for the evidence. She walked out the front door. Arthur sat alone in the silence. The sirens were loud now. He could hear the tires crunching on the gravel of the driveway. He looked at the empty walls. He looked at the card table. He looked at his hands. He had wanted to be a man who owned everything. And in the end, he was the only thing in the house that had no value left to strip. The arrest was undignified. Arthur didn't fight. When the two officers walked into the open foyer, guns drawn, shouting commands, Arthur simply raised his hands. He was too tired to stand. They had to haul him up by his armpits, dragging him out of the house like a sack of unwanted laundry. As they marched him down the front steps, the morning sun blinded him. He squinted, trying to regain some semblance of composure. He was Arthur Sterling. He needed to walk with his head up. But then he saw the audience. The cul-de-sac was filled, not just with police cruisers, but with news vans. Channel 4, Channel 7, CNN, the vultures had circled, and standing just beyond the police tape, next to a silver Aston Martin he had never seen before, stood Margaret. She was watching him. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just witnessing. Next to her stood a tall young man in a Yale hoodie. Leo. Arthur's heart lurched. He tried to catch Leo's eye. He wanted to shout, I did it for you. I wanted to leave you an empire. But Leo looked at his father with the cold detachment of a stranger. He said something to his mother. She nodded, and they both turned away. They got into the Aston Martin. As the police shoved Arthur's head down to guide him into the back of the squad car, he watched his wife and son drive away. They didn't look back. 6 months later, the Federal Correctional Facility in Danbury was a far cry from the corner office on the 42nd floor. The lighting was fluorescent and buzzed constantly. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and boiled cabbage. Arthur sat in the visitation room. He had requested a meeting with his public defender. His assets had been so thoroughly frozen and seized that he couldn't afford private counsel. He was relying on an overworked state attorney named Mr. Henderson. It's not looking good, Arthur, Henderson said, shuffling through a stack of papers. The forensic evidence is watertight. The testimony from Mrs. Gable is damning, and the sheer volume of documents your wife provided. It's the most organized evidence file I've ever seen. The DA is calling it the Sterling Standard. Arthur stared at the metal table. What's the offer? 15 years, Henderson said. Minimum security if you plead out now. If we go to trial and lose, you're looking at 25 to life. RICO charges stick hard. 15 years. He would be 61 when he got out. I'll take it, Arthur whispered. Henderson nodded, relieved. Smart choice. Sign here. Arthur signed. His signature, once a flourish that moved millions of dollars, was now small and shaky. Oh, one more thing, Henderson said, reaching into his briefcase. This came for you. It cleared the prison mailroom this morning. He slid a glossy magazine across the table. It was the latest issue of Architectural Digest. Arthur frowned. Why would I want this? Look at page 40, Henderson said, with a strange look on his face. Arthur opened the magazine. He flipped to page 40. The headline read, "A Masterpiece Reborn: How Philanthropist Margaret Sterling Transformed a Hollow House into a Haven." There were photos. Beautiful, high-resolution photos. Arthur gasped. It was his house, the Brookline estate, but it wasn't empty anymore. The walls were painted a warm, soft cream. The floors were covered in plush rugs. The furniture was modern, vibrant, and full of life. But it wasn't a home. The caption read, "The Sterling Center for Women and Children." He read the article. After a painful divorce, Margaret Sterling donated her historic Brookline estate to the city. It now serves as a transitionary shelter for women and children escaping financial abuse and domestic turmoil. "I wanted to take a place that was built on lies," Mrs. Sterling says, "and turn it into a foundation of truth." There was a photo of Margaret standing in the foyer, the same foyer where Arthur had been arrested. She was cutting a red ribbon. Standing next to her was Leo, smiling proudly, and standing on her other side, holding the scissors with her, was a woman Arthur recognized. It was Jessica. Arthur brought the magazine closer to his face. Jessica looked healthier. She was wearing modest clothes. She was smiling at Margaret. The caption read, "Mrs. Sterling is joined by Program Director Jessica Vane, a former interior designer who now helps women rebuild their lives and their spaces." Arthur dropped the magazine. They were working together. Jessica hadn't just rejected him. Margaret had recruited her. Margaret had saved her. "She won," Arthur whispered. "She took everything, even my mistress." "She didn't just win, Arthur," Henderson said, packing up his briefcase. "She rewrote the game." The guard tapped Arthur on the shoulder. "Time's up, Sterling." Arthur stood up. He looked at the magazine one last time. The image of the house warm, full of light, full of people burned into his retinas. He walked back to his cell. It was a 6x8 concrete box. It was empty, save for a cot and a toilet. But unlike the house in Brookline, this emptiness was exactly what he deserved. Arthur Sterling lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, he finally understood the value of things. And he knew, with a crushing certainty, that the poorest man in the world wasn't the one without money. It was the man who had traded a queen for a pawn, only to find out the pawn was playing for the other side. The cell door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final gavel. And that is the story of Arthur Sterling, a man who thought he could bankrupt his family emotionally and financially, only to find out that his wife, Margaret, was the true CFO of his life. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones plotting the loudest revenge. Margaret didn't just get mad. She got everything. She turned his mistress into an ally, his son into a partner, and his legacy into a shelter for the very people he would have looked down upon. What do you think? Did Arthur deserve 15 years? Or was the humiliation of the empty house enough punishment? And what about Jessica? Do you think she really changed? Or was she just surviving? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and remember, check your blind spots.